Today, I wear a hat because I have had one haircut in the past 6 months. Hello, it's your boy Benjamin, and today I'm going to be talking about wilderness therapy, how it works, my experiences, although not so much my experiences. I'm going to be doing another video about that with fun wilderness stories, and so I'm just going to be talking about wilderness in general. I went to a wilderness therapy program in Utah. I went from June 11th to August 24th, which is 10 and a half weeks, which is 74 days, and I was in 4 groups while I was at wilderness therapy. You will know from my other video, I think it was the 1 month on T video, that I was in 2 boys groups, and then I got bullied in the second one, which kind of sucked. And then I asked to move to a girls group. And so I got moved to the girls groups, and then I merged with another girls group, so that's why I was in 2 girls group instead of just 1. For those of you who do not know, I'm trans. That's why I was in guys groups and girls groups. That's one of the reasons I was in wilderness therapy, because there were a lot of issues related to being trans. So, few things you should know about being in wilderness. First of all, there was always and I hate to say it like this, but it's absolutely true, the looming presence of HIPAA, which is a patient protection law thing, and basically, because of HIPAA, any pictures that they take, you can't really share with anybody, because otherwise that would be a violation of HIPAA. We aren't allowed to really talk to anybody or tell them that we're in a wilderness therapy place, because therapy is part of a medical thing, and so that would be a violation of HIPAA. HIPAA is just everywhere. Even here in my TBS, therapeutic boarding school, I am not allowed to have any other of the students in my videos, because that would be a violation of HIPAA. I can't say any real names, not that I would anyways, just because of privacy for people, but it would be a big no-no if I were to say any of their real names, because of HIPAA. So there's always a looming threat of HIPAA, whenever you are in treatment. Another thing you should know about wilderness is that a lot of people, they don't want to be there. The same goes for TBSs. A lot of people are gooned, which that isn't the real name for it. They just call it gooning, because how it works is, in the middle of the night, you are sleeping in your bed peacefully, and these 2 usually very big, very buff people barge into your room and take you off into a van, ship you to the airport, and then you get put in a wilderness. That's basically how it works. I think it's properly called transport service. What the kids call it is just gooning for a lot of kids. It can actually be quite traumatic for some people, but in all honesty, that's one of the only ways that some people will even go to wilderness, is if they're gooned. I was not gooned. I went willingly, but I know quite a bit of people who were gooned. There was on my first morning in wilderness, I woke up in a little shelter at base camp, and somebody had written a little ditty on the, I hate saying ditty, somebody had written a little song based off of a commercial, the Cars for Kids commercial, but it was 1-800-GOON your kids, 1-800-GOON your kids, 1-800-GOON your kids, kidnap your kids today. I found that hilarious. I still think about it. Another thing you should know is that Utah is basically treatment central. There are very few rights for minors in Utah. Not to say that they can do whatever they want to children in Utah. That's not what I'm saying. But compared to other states, there are very few rights. And so that's why there are a lot of wilderness centers. There are a lot of residential treatment centers, RTCs. There are a lot of TBSs, therapeutic boarding schools. There are a lot of that kind of stuff. That's why I am able to say that my wilderness therapy was in Utah. Because I don't want to say the real name of it just for personal reasons. But if I say it's in Utah, you have like 15 wildernesses to choose from. Good luck figuring that one out. Another thing. What even is wilderness therapy? I can tell you that. Basically, how wilderness therapy works is it takes you away from all the negative things that you're experiencing at home. Maybe it's friends who are bad influences, maybe it's your family, or maybe it's just the environment that's keeping you in your issues. It takes you away from all of that. And it basically strips you down to your bare minimum. You don't have anything, you don't have any of your normal coping mechanisms, whether that's drugs, whether that is like just Netflix or something, trying to like keep your mind off of the avoidance coping. It strips you away to just you. And then it's very hard, honestly, because when I was having really rough nights, normally I would resort to music. That's my personal favorite coping mechanism, and I couldn't. We didn't have MP3 players in wilderness. We didn't have phones in wilderness. No. We just had to sit with our feelings, which is really tough. But I got through it, and I'm stronger for it. As I said, it takes you down to your bare minimum, and then you have to build yourself up from there, and it's up to you to do that. What else? Another thing that it does is it puts you in stressful situations, and it teaches you how to deal with them, and it teaches you how to grow from them. I had a ton of stressful situations. There were times when we didn't know when we were going to get water again. And there were times, and I will talk about this in my fun wilderness stories video, but there was a time when we were hiking all day, and at 7 o'clock at night, and mind you, we were like 3 miles away from our campsite, and we had not had dinner, and it was 7 o'clock at night, and it was super cold, because in the deserts of Utah, it gets really hot in the day and super cold at night. And our guides were like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna hike up this mountain now. That is literally just made of rocks, and it's super steep." And that was super stressful. We ended up getting back to camp at 2:30 in the morning. So those situations, you can grow from them, and it also helps you say, "Hey, I did that. So anything else I do, it probably won't be worse than that night." That's how I looked at it, anyways. It also is fully therapeutic. Every aspect of wilderness is therapeutic. The people, you can relate to the people. They're probably going through similar things as you. The guides, that not all of them have like degrees in social work or therapy or anything like that, but they know what they're doing, and they're there for a reason, and they're willing to help you. You have therapy once a week, obviously, and the intent for every single person there is the same, is to be able to do therapeutic work. So like everything that you do is related to therapy. The hikes, the getting water, the everything is related to therapy. It honestly, it just empowers you. This might not have the same effect for everybody, but I know it certainly did for me. As I said before, if you do a really hard thing, for me at least, I know that practically anything else I'll do, at least it's not that, because that was so hard. And I know if I can do that hard thing, I can do practically anything. Now on to the just in general wilderness stuff. That's what you needed for like a preface. And one thing that not everybody knows about wilderness is that if you send your kid to wilderness, or if you go to wilderness, there's a 90% chance that you're not going home. I did not know a single person while I was at wilderness that was going home. I knew some people that were going to go home for like 2 weeks, and then they were going to go to a boarding school, but none of them were actually going to stay home. If you go to wilderness, if you send your kid to wilderness, you're likely making a 1 to 2 year commitment. And let me tell you, it's expensive. Wilderness can cost up to like $50,000. And then a boarding school after that can be even more expensive, especially if it's therapeutic, because the therapist costs a lot of money and all that. So just know that if you go to wilderness, or if you send your kid to wilderness, they're probably not going to come home. Up to my 5th week in wilderness, I thought that I was going to go home afterwards. And now I'm at the TBS. So you really never know what's going to happen, but it's very likely that you're not going to go home, unfortunately. Another thing is that wilderness is not easy. It's not a fix it. It's not like, oh, you go there and immediately your problems are fixed. That is not it. It's hard. It's dirty. It sucks. Honestly, most people come out of wilderness saying,
"That sucked. I grew from it, but it still sucked."
I don't really see it that way, because I grew from it, but I also like the wilderness. I like the woods. I like, just nature in general. A lot of people, If I'm honest, I've heard this so many times because so many treatment centers are in Utah. A lot of people hate Utah because they were stuck there for 2 months or a year or whatever. Most wildernesses are straight backpacking as well. There are some that do some other stuff, but most of the time it's literally just backpacking in circles over a huge plot of land in the sun, in the desert for 2 months, 3 months. There are people who can stay there up to 4 months. And that I find insane, but a lot of these wildernesses, they say that it's 8 to 12 weeks, and it's not. I have not heard of a single person who just stayed in wilderness for 8 weeks. It's always 10 to 14, 10 to 16 weeks. Another thing is that wildernesses are varying degrees of, I don't know how to say this, but primalness. The one I had, you got to go to base camp once a week and you got to sleep in these little shelters, but you still had to sleep outside the whole time. There's some who have base camps that have cabins in them, and you can sleep in bunk beds once a week. There are some where you have no base camp at all. You have to start a shelter every single time that you want to sleep. Some of them where you have to find your own water. Mine had natural water spots that were already mapped out that we would go to. They were still natural streams and stuff, but we knew where we were going. Some of them, you just have to find water wherever. Most of them, you have to do what's called busting, which is making your own fire. Ours was complicated because there was a fire ban in Utah at the time I was there, but most of them you have to take a piece of wood and you have to carve it, and you have to get a piece of string and tie it around, and then you get another piece of wood and a rock, and you have to do the thing with the fire, and then poof, fire, and yay, food. Another thing, you probably 90% chance you will have to cook your own food at wilderness at some point over a fire that you made. And that's not easy. You also will probably be with people you don't like very much. Now, I made some really good friends in wilderness, but in my experience, there is always one problem kid. And I hate to say this, but it's true. There is always one kid that's lagging far behind. There's always one kid that's complaining constantly. There's always one kid that is refusing, and it's usually all the same kid. That's usually a person who's a bit early in their stay, but it's in every single group, there's always that one person. Did I mention that when you are backpacking, which basically all of wilderness is backpacking, the pack can weigh up to 70 pounds in 100-degree heat, or if you're in the winter, it can be negative 20 in Utah. I'm not even joking. Hypothermia is a very real thing. Frostbite is a very real thing in the winter in wilderness. I'm actually very grateful that I went in the summer. Another thing, and not every wilderness place has to do this, but since mine was in Utah and things don't biodegrade in the very dry soil that Utah has, we had to carry our own poo. And it was not fun because have you smelled poo before? I mean, probably, but keep in mind that we were in a wilderness program where most of my diet, at least, consisted of beans. It didn't smell good. I can tell you that. And we had to carry it for like 3+ days at a time. That was fun. I really enjoyed that. Now I'm complaining and saying all this bad stuff about wilderness, but bottom line, I grew from it and I'm so much better for it. As I said, I didn't really hate it. A lot of people did. Not to say that I loved it all the time, because I did not love it all the time. But overall, I think it was a positive experience for me. I mean, I learned so much. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about how to deal with others. I learned about coping skills. I learned about radical acceptance. I learned about all this type of stuff that is so useful to me now. Being out there and being just with your mind, especially when you're backpacking, just looking at the ground for hours on end, it forces you to think about things that maybe you don't want to think about, or maybe you haven't thought about for a long time, and that can be so beneficial. And when I say that I learned how to deal with people better, I mean exponentially better. It's one thing that I took away from wilderness that has been useful to me basically every single day since then is that no one is an ass for no reason. Every single person who does something mean, every single person who does something that maybe it affects other people in a negative way, it's because they're dealing with their own stuff. And I've learned really and truly not to take things personally. I read a book. It's a really good book. It's a bit weird. It basically told me that everything was an illusion and everything is a construct. But that's not important. The important thing is the message is that you can't take anything personally because anything that anybody does is coming from their own perception of the world. If someone does something that is just you see is really mean, is really whatever, it's probably because they're going through their own stuff. And when someone would refuse to hike or something like that, at the end, I could know myself that that person, they're not doing it just to keep us back. Yeah, I mean, maybe they're being a bit selfish, but they're only doing it because they have so many emotions in them right now that they don't know how to deal with it. That's something that I just really took away from Wilderness is just how to deal with people better and just not to take things personally and how to deal with conflict better. I don't like conflict. I don't at all. But I know at least how to navigate it now, and that is so helpful in life. I'm sure many of you know. I also learned how to, going off of conflict, I learned how to deal with hard situations. Because I know that life isn't always enjoyable. All of you know this. And Wilderness, especially, was not particularly enjoyable sometimes. But I learned how to accept those situations and make something out of them and look on the positive side, which I know it can be so hard to look on the positives sometimes because there's just so many negatives that can come into life. But it makes your life so much better to just look on the positive side and at least try to have a good time at any given moment, because sometimes we can all play ourselves as the victims and say, oh, this person did this to me and this person did this to me and the world isn't fair. But I think if you accept that the world isn't fair, that it makes it so much easier to say, hey, the world isn't fair, but I'm gonna try to have the best time that I can in this life because you only have one life. And if you spend your entire life just labeling yourself as the victim, it's not a really great way to live. It just kind of sucks because then you're resentful and you're sad and you don't need to be. Now, one thing I will say is that Wilderness isn't for everybody. It may seem like, oh, I can send my kid into this and no matter what, my kid will become a better person, and it just doesn't really work like that. I mean, Wilderness will turn some of the toughest, most stubborn people into people who actually want to better themselves and learn from their mistakes. But it's not for everyone. And if you go onto a website of whatever wilderness place you're looking at, it will tell you what they treat. And as I said, when you're signing up for wilderness, you're not just signing up for that. You're signing up for a year commitment, 6 months commitment. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years. I know some people who went into treatment in ninth grade and now they're seniors and they are still in treatment. It depends on the kid. Every person's journey is different. My best advice for anybody who's looking into wilderness is just use your best judgment and do your research. Research how wilderness therapy works. Don't just listen to me. Don't watch this video and then decide, oh, I'm gonna go to wilderness therapy now. Don't do that, please. Do your research. Research different wilderness therapy places. Decide which one is best for you or your child. And I'm just a guy who went to wilderness who is just sharing his thoughts on the internet. That's it. I hope this video was helpful to any of you who just wanted to know about wilderness or looking into it or anything like that. But don't just take my word for it. Go and do your research. Decide if it's right for you. Again, I hope this was helpful to somebody. Personally, I very much so enjoyed wilderness, but I know not everybody did. Overall, I found it really helpful to me, and I learned a lot. I did. I hope you have a very good day, and until next time, goodbye.